Re- Revelation chapter 14. If you'll recall, as a way of review, chapter 13 begins a period of the book that takes a step back from the chronological telling of the tribulation and gives us an overview of chapter 13, gives us an overview of the spiritual nature of everything that's going on. So we see the beast being introduced to us. Those beasts are the Antichrist and the false prophet. And not just during the tribulation period, but gives us an overview of the struggle between God and Satan, the forces of good and the forces of evil throughout human history. So that was the overview that we found out in chapter 13. The overview that we're going to find in chapter 14 is an overview of what results from the war in heaven being over. Remember, the war in heaven was conducted and Satan loses, and Satan is tossed down to the earth. He is forbidden to come back into the heavens. And so he begins that great persecution. He chases the Jews out into the wilderness. And when God prevents him from destroying the Jews, then he turns on the Gentiles, the Gentile believers, the Christians all over the world. Because during the second half of the Great Tribulation, second half of the tribulation, which is called the Great Tribulation, the whole world is under the sway or the rule of the Antichrist and his kingdom. So chapter 14 is an overview of what happens during that period of time during the Great Tribulation and the accompanying last seven judgments. Does that make sense? So we're still in an overview way of looking at the scripture, not in a strict chronological sense. In other words, this is not this thing happens and then this thing happens and then this thing happens. No, all of these things, this is the totality of that final 3.5 years. This is heaven's viewpoint of it. So let's begin verse 1 in chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like a roar of many waters, like the sound of a loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb everywhere he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouths no lie was found, for they are blameless. Okay, who is this group of 144,000? Remember in chapter 7, God sets aside 144,000 Jewish evangelists, and he has them marked on their foreheads, right? And that during the first half of the tribulation, that group is evangelizing the world along with the two witnesses, right? The church has been raptured because in the age of grace, the church is God's witness to the gospel. God never leaves himself without a witness, never leaves himself without a witness. And that's our responsibility right now as the church. We are to be God's witness to the gospel. Well, the church is removed at the rapture, so now God sets aside additional witnesses. He sends the two witnesses that we talked about earlier. I believe it's Moses and Elijah. Could be Elijah and Enoch, but I believe it's Moses and Elijah. And these 144,000 Jewish evangelists. The two witnesses are specifically to be a witness to Jerusalem and to the Jewish nation. That's why they're at the temple. That's why they're in Jerusalem. They're preaching the gospel and being a witness there. The 144,000 back in chapter 7 were going to be sent all over the world as God's missionaries during the tribulation period because the Christians are gone. The church is gone. So in order to have a witness, God sets apart those 144,000. Now, some commentators want to say that this is a different group of 144,000, that this is just the first 144,000 of the church or the tribulation believers that were martyred. But I don't see any need to separate this 144,000 from the other 144,000 because they both have marks on their forehead, the same mark on their forehead, right? Same mark we're going to get, and we'll see in chapter 22. But they have the same marks. So my belief and my understanding of this group of 144,000 is that initial group of missionaries, that 144,000, have been going all over the world during the first half of the tribulation, When Satan is thrown down to earth and he turns from chasing the Jews because God has protected them, he immediately starts persecuting and slaughtering the believers. And I believe he finds these 144,000 and they're martyred. They're martyred at the midpoint of the tribulation, right? And you'll see in a few minutes why I say that. And I always keep in mind that God never leaves himself without a witness. So now we know that the two Jewish evangelists have been killed. And the whole world celebrated when they were killed. Remember when we talked about that? And then 3 days later, God raised them up there in the streets of Jerusalem and brought them to heaven. So those witnesses are gone. Now the 144,000 witnesses are gone. So the only witnesses left are the underground church, because to witness during the Great Tribulation, as we saw last week, that he's going to cause everybody to get the mark of the beast. And if you don't have the mark of the beast, you can't participate in society. In other words, you're going to be hunted down if you don't have the mark of the beast. So if you're going to share the gospel during the second half of the tribulation, it can lead, and most probably will lead, to your execution, right? So questions about the 144,000 on Mount Sinai?
Just a quick question about your last comment. You said that if you were to witness, then it would lead to your execution. But if everyone else has already chosen the mark of the beast, then there'd be no point in witnessing to them.
But not everybody will choose the mark of the beast, and that's coming right up, right now. Yeah.
Sorry, got ahead.
Because God never leaves himself without a witness. And up to this point, it's always been a human witness, right? In the church age, it's always been a human witness. It began with the man, Jesus Christ. Yes, he is God, but he came as a man, lived as a man, did everything he did, all the miracles he did as a man. He set aside his godly powers and did it through the power of the Father. And then the apostles and the early church, they were God's witnesses, right? And that was isn't that the Great Commission? You go. You will be my witnesses. Remember in Acts, he tells the apostles, you will be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. In Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That's what we're called to do, is to be his witnesses. That's why we call it witnessing, by the way, just in case you didn't know that. Snippet from church, way back church history. And so God has left, is the Antichrist has eliminated all of God's human witnesses. So what does God do? Because God never leaves himself without a witness. Now we get supernatural witnesses. Look in verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. He said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth and the sea and the springs of water. So Satan thinks he's eliminated all of God's witnesses, so God sends an angel. So now imagine this scenario. You've already lived through the first half of the tribulation. Now it's the Great Tribulation. You've seen all of these people who accepted Christ during the tribulation. They're being slaughtered. They're being killed. And so you're thinking, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. And all of a sudden, there's an angel flying in the sky proclaiming the gospel of Christ. Right? That's a pretty powerful witness, is it not? This is, it's obviously a supernatural event that's going on, because, and I mentioned this earlier, at the midpoint of the tribulation, things take a supernatural turn. Many of the first judgments were naturalistic, right? We got earthquakes, we got flood, we got all of that stuff that we cause every day on a minor scale, but God just scales it up to have it worldwide. But now these are obviously supernatural events. There's no longer any hiding from the fact that there are two supernatural forces at war. And we've got an angel of God flying through the air, preaching the gospel to everybody on the planet. Okay? That's a pretty strong witness. And that's a pretty strong proof of the truth of the gospel. So many will respond to this call of the gospel. Many will respond to this witness, right? We've got an angel flying. I've read about angels. Well, that must be true then. So many will accept the gospel here. And then another angel, a second, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all the nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. We'll get to who Babylon the Great is. Suffice it to say at this point, I believe in chapter 18, we'll discuss it more in detail, but suffice it at this point is, it is the capital city of the Antichrist. So, and commentators are divided. Is it a renewed Babylon? Because Babylon was destroyed. And I know back during the Gulf War, we talked about it, and Saddam Hussein was rebuilding Babylon. Well, not much of it. If you look it up, there's not much there, right? They've got an amphitheater and a couple of buildings and some foundations. Well, I think that work has stopped. So there was great excitement at one time that, hey, this is fulfilling the book of Revelation. Saddam Hussein is rebuilding Babylon. It doesn't necessarily mean it was ancient Babylon, right? Babylon could be a view of it from God's viewpoint, because the two most mentioned cities in the scripture are Jerusalem and Babylon, because Babylon is symbolic and stands for Satan's headquarters on earth. Jerusalem is God's city. Yes, question.
Yes. So the people during the tribulation, some will accept it during the first phase when they see the angel. More will probably accept the fact that Jesus died on the cross for them. My question is, and I'm only saying it, I wouldn't be jealous if they did, but if they accepted Christ at that last second before the world collapses, do they hold the same positions as those of us that are walking on earth right now as Christians?
No, the church has a very privileged and special position. The only group that is the bride of Christ who will rule and reign with him is his bride, his church.
Okay.
What's
their purpose then of getting saved?
Well, they'll inhabit heaven.
Okay.
They'll serve. We saw earlier in the book that they serve God in his temple day and night.
Okay.
Right? This group follows Jesus everywhere he goes, but they're not the bride. We're the bride.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome. So my point is, it could be any city in which the Antichrist sets up to be his capital city. It could be a rebuilt Babylon. But Babylon is symbolic of Satan's headquarters, Satan's capital, throughout the scripture. And I said Jerusalem is mentioned most. Second most mentioned city is Babylon, because of this great spiritual warfare that's been going on, right? Everybody understand what the second angel is saying? He's warning the nations. He's warning everybody, just like the first angel came and pronounced the gospel, proclaimed the gospel. This is warning that judgment is about to fall on the kingdom of the Antichrist, right? So this is an announcement of coming judgment. The judgment hasn't happened at this moment. This is just the announcement of judgment, but judgment is coming. Questions about the second angel? Another angel, and another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on its forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, who receives the mark of its name. So here is a clear warning that everybody on the planet understands: if I accept the mark of the beast, I'm condemned. I'm damned for all eternity, because there's an angel flying in the sky telling them, if you accept the mark of the beast, you will face God's wrath and you will be thrown into hell. So that goes back to what we talked about last week, that the mark of the beast and the acceptance of the mark of the beast is a conscious decision. You're not going to be tricked into taking the mark of the beast. Everyone who takes the mark of the beast will understand the consequences. But most, just like most of humanity throughout history, have understood the consequences and decided to live for themselves anyway, to live for the here and now, to live for their flesh. So right here at the midpoint of the tribulation, there's an angel flying ahead. When the Antichrist is getting ready to implement this mark of the beast system, there's an angel from heaven flying in the sky saying, do not take this mark. Because if you take this mark, there's no hope for you. But we see most of humanity takes the mark, but many will not. Many will heed these three witnesses. Many will heed these warnings. They will have accepted the gospel at the first witness. They will have understood that God is ultimately going to win, that judgment is coming upon the Antichrist and his kingdom. And thirdly, they just been warned again, do not take the mark of the beast so you can participate in society, so that you can buy and sell, so that you can feed your flesh, so that you can live. Don't do it, because if you do it, you will face the entirety of God's wrath. So that's why I said last week, you can't take the mark of the beast and not know what you're doing. It's not something, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That turned out to be the mark of the beast. That's not how it works. How it works is you make a conscious decision to worship the beast. You choose sides, in other words. And if you choose his side, you will lose. Questions about the three witnesses? But anyhow, in answer to Jenny's earlier question, it's on the basis of these three witnesses that many, even during the second half of the tribulation, will surrender their lives to Christ. And then it says in verse 12, here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead. This is the second of 7 blessings in the book of Revelation. They'll start coming a little quicker, but remember when we very first started the study, I told you there's 7 blessings in the book of Revelation. Here's the second one. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds shall follow them. So questions about that? All right. Now turn with me to Matthew chapter 13. Remember what Matthew chapter 13 is? The 7 kingdom parables. We went through those a while back. If you were here then. If not, I'm sorry. We'll do it again sometime. Matthew chapter 13, verse 24. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came up and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burnt, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now look down at verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And when his disciples came to him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, the field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy has sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the close of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the close of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. We're getting ready to read about the harvest of the wheat and the tares, right? So throughout history, the wheat and the tares have grown up in the field, which Jesus explained to us is the world. So during the second half of the tribulation, there's going to be multitudes who die, which in a spiritual sense is the harvest. And they're going to be separated. The righteous will go to heaven. The unrighteous will not. They will be thrown into the fiery furnace. So let's read about this final harvest using the book of Revelation's eyes. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head. That's the Stephanos crown, not the diadem. It could be Jesus. It could be an angel. It doesn't really matter in our understanding of this. Some commentators think this is Jesus sitting on the cloud, controlling the harvest, or it's the angel he appointed to do it. I don't know. And I really don't have an opinion. Well, I do, because it's a Stephanos crown, which is the victor's crown, not a diadem, which is the royal crown. However, Jesus could be wearing the victor's crown because he just won victory. So it doesn't matter if it's Jesus or an angel sitting on the cloud. And a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Now, this is the harvest that happens during the second half of the tribulation, right? We're getting ready to read about the final harvest at the Battle of Armageddon. This is not that. This is the harvest of that 3.5 period of the Great Tribulation, when so much of humanity had died. Now, why was Ruth in the book of Ruth in Boaz's field? Come on, little Bible trivia. We talked through the book of Ruth. Why was Ruth in Boaz's field?
She was reaping some of the grain so that she could feed her mother-in-law and herself, and it was just like corners.
She was gleaning, right? She was gleaning because in the law of Moses, way back when, that boring part of the Bible none of us like to read, there's a little addendum to the law that God through Moses says, when you reap your fields, do not reap it all. Do not harvest it all. Leave some for the poor and the needy. And so in the law of God that he gave through Moses, they were commanded not to reap it all. So during this reaping, not every Christian is taken. There will be some left. And it's that some left, that gleaning, who will inhabit the millennial kingdom, right? So in God's harvest, he's obeying his own law. He's not harvesting every stalk of wheat. He's leaving some. Does that make sense? And that's who will inherit or enter into the millennial kingdom to repopulate the earth. The gleanings of this harvest. Verse 17. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has authority over the fire. What's fire symbolic of in the scripture? God's judgment. So the angel who has the authority over God's judgment, authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, where its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. That's about 180 some miles, give or take. This is the great harvest that will happen at the Battle of Armageddon, when all the armies of the world, all the surviving armies of the world are gathered, right, in Jerusalem, gathered on the plains of Megiddo, as a matter of fact. That's where we get the word Armageddon. Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. That's what it means. So Armageddon is when all the armies of the world are gathered together, and at the second coming, Jesus comes down, his feet hit the Mount of Olives, and there's a confrontation between all of the armies of the Antichrist, all of the armies of the world that have come out to fight him, to oppose him. And Jesus speaks a word, and they're all destroyed, right? And we have come back with him, so we get to witness this. But that's what the second harvest here in chapter 14 is talking about. So we've got the first harvest, which is the overview of the harvest that happens during the Great Tribulation, and the grape harvest, which is that final culmination of the rebellion and the tribulation. So that ends chapter 17. We'll start transitioning back into that chronological reading of the book of Revelation next week. Questions, comments, concerns?
So many.
Yeah, I know Revelation 14 can be difficult.
So this is just my understanding. So the rapture happens and the church is taken to heaven, right?
Yes.
And then there's 144,000 Jews that are left here to be witnesses,
Yes.
right? Okay. Bear with me for a minute.
Yep.
And then
Okay.
the,
Let me clarify
140
something. Let me clarify something real quick. The 144,000 Jews were not left here. If they are a member of the church, they are raptured by the church.
Right.
It seems to be that the
they're left here to
rapture.
witness. They're
Yeah,
here
it
to
seems to be
witness.
that the rapture is what triggers them to accept Jesus as their Messiah, and he sets them aside as his evangelist.
Right.
Okay.
So we're already in the tribulation, right?
Yes.
And after that, so when the angels come back, is that during the first 3.5 years or the second 3.5 years?
This particular time, I believe it's talking about the second 3.5 years, but it could be the whole 7-year period of all the deaths that have happened.
Okay. And at this time, this first harvest you're talking about, is that when those 144,000 witnesses go up?
Quite possibly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The 144,000 are martyred at the beginning of the second half of the tribulation.
So Jesus doesn't actually come back down here and like take more people up like magically like he's taking his church. These are just, when you say the harvest, they're just people that die in belief of Jesus.
Yes. And we have to understand that John is viewing events on earth from God's standpoint, from God's viewpoint, from heaven's viewpoint. So when we see a bunch of people die, God sees a harvest. So there'll be wheat in that harvest and there'll be tares in that harvest. So during the tribulation period, believers will die and unbelievers will die.
Okay. I guess.
So yeah, it's not a second rapture. This is speaking spiritually and symbolically, right? Because what happens when somebody dies now? If they're a believer, they go into God's presence. If they're an unbeliever, they go to Hades. And the same thing will continue through the tribulation period. When someone is martyred, a believer is martyred, they go to heaven. Their spirit goes to heaven. And we saw them earlier in the book. These are the ones who are under the throne of God. And they're the ones, remember, they cry out for God. How long do we have to wait for you to bring our justice? For you to be the avenger of our blood? And God says, just wait a little longer till the full number of your brothers who will also be martyred are complete. Right? So this martyrship, this period of martyrdom extends through the entirety of the tribulation period. It just is very sped up beginning at the midpoint.
So are the harvests like a mass, I don't want to say execution, but I guess that's the best word that I can come up with. Because when I visualize it, I just see someone sitting there saying, hey, throw your sickle out now, and just like a bunch of people die.
Yeah. No, the first harvest happens over the whole period. And it's just a symbolic way that heaven sees all of the deaths that are occurring, the deaths of the saints and the deaths of the unbelievers. Right? It's the second harvest where they are trampled under the winepress of God's wrath. And that's the key to help us understand the difference between these two. Right? The second harvest is all unbelievers. There are no believers in the second harvest. This is when Jesus destroys the armies of the earth and all the unbelievers of the earth. And the only thing that is left are those wheat stalks that did not get harvested during this period, right? So you can't view it as, yes, we're given a picture of an angel swinging a sickle all over the earth. Well, that's a long swing because the earth is round. And the sickle is kind of curved, and that, so it's a symbol, it's imagery. So this is just heaven's imagery and heaven's viewpoint and understanding of what's going on during the tribulation period. And I'm struggling to how to get my thoughts across a little.
I just might not be conveying what I'm thinking very well, but I'm sure I'll have questions
Welcome to my club.
on Sunday.
What else? Come on, if you have a question, somebody else does too, and they're just afraid to say it. This is Revelation chapter 14. There has to be more questions. This is a tough chapter. Come on. All right, y'all gonna be stubborn. We'll shut it down.
Hey, Jeff, got a question. I mean, for me, trying to, follow and I'm trying to visualize what the end state looks like. But so is there a pictorial or a graphic representation of kind of what this looks like on a linear scale as far as what happens and
Chronologically speaking,
yeah, or,
probably. I don't know.
Even event or the angels coming down and they're doing X. To me, that I'm trying to. I mean, you're doing a very good job of explaining this better than I've heard, but still, to me, I'm trying to visualize, the 144,000 standing out there somewhere. I'm trying to visualize the angels coming down with a sickle and how it's going to happen and who he's going after or whatever. And I'm just wondering if there's ever been, a pictorial.
I'm
for lack of
I'm
better word,
almost-
comic book.
I'm almost 100% certain there has, because there's so much interest in the book of Revelation and there is so much imagery in it. So I'm sure there is. I just don't have one. I never crossed my mind to go find one, but I will go look for one. I'm sure there's probably one on Precept Austin if I just log on that.
Because
and
I'm
do that.
more of
But
a visual.
Yeah.
I'm more a visual person.
but here's the thing. Much of what John has seen is spiritual in nature, and he's trying to convey it in a physical understanding. He's trying to convey it for us to understand it in something that will be familiar to us. So John has actually seen spiritual happenings. And so like the harvest, you harvest all the time. It doesn't happen all at once, right? Not all your tomatoes are ripe at the same time.
Right.
So it's a continual harvest, but it's just one harvest. This is your harvest of tomatoes this year.
Yeah.
But, so I got some Monday, got some Tuesday, got some Wednesday, got some Thursday, all 7 days I get some tomatoes, but it's one harvest. So that's that first harvest.
Yeah. And the other thing too is all this happening at the same time, all these angels, because he can only explain one thought at a time, but is all this really occurring at the same time?
Quite possibly, because heaven is not bound by time as we are.
Right.
So again, John has seen things in heaven, and he's seen the spiritual nature of he's seen the true spiritual nature of what's going on. Like last week, heaven sees the Antichrist as a horrible beast. Humanity sees him as a wonderful man. Right? So our viewpoint and heaven's viewpoint are not the same. And John is trying to convey to us what heaven's viewpoint is of the events happening on earth. in language that we can hopefully try to understand. And obviously we see how difficult it is. It was difficult for John with his first century understanding of the world, trying to explain all of this. And here we are in 2000s, and we're still struggling to understand because we can never fully understand spiritual nature of everything until we get there. Then we will. That's what John says in First John. This very same John says, right now we see darkly as in a mirror, but then we will see him as he is, and we will be like him. But it's not until we see him face to face. Then we will have a complete understanding. But I'll look for a visual help aid or whatever. But I'm sure there's plenty out there. You just got to be careful when you go Google these things, because there's some crazy people out there. Really crazy people. So it's just got to be somebody that is trustworthy and godly. But I'll certainly look for them.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
I got another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
No worries. No, don't apologize. It's my favorite part.
I think I'm just caught up on this 144,000. So last week in chapter 12, you discussed that Satan's going to pursue Israel and destroy the Jews, and he's got to place a sanctuary for the Jews to flee to.
Yes.
And that was verse 13. Are those Jews the same 144,000?
No, the 144,000 are the Jewish evangelists who had been sent all over the world. Remember, I said God always leaves himself a witness, and the two witnesses, whom I believe to be Moses and Elijah, are assigned. God assigns them to be the witnesses to the Jewish nation. So they're in Jerusalem.
Right.
They're at the temple wall, the Western Wall, whatever. They're proclaiming Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. The 144,000 Jewish evangelists are going all over the world proclaiming Christ as the Savior.
So then when it talks here about, I guess I'm confused because it's talking about the 144,000 singing a song. Nobody can learn it but them.
Yes.
Where does that come from? Like,
I
guess I don't understand.
Well, and I probably don't either. Why they're singing a song that we can't learn? It's because we weren't part of that 144,000. We have a different destiny than the 144,000. The 144,000 are companions of Christ for all eternity. That's what it said. And they follow the Lamb everywhere he goes. We, however, are the bride of the Lamb. So we're not his companions, we're his family. So there's a difference in the church and the 144,000. So why they learn a new song, I don't know, other than that they're part of that group, and that's part of what God has assigned them to do.
So that's after they're quote unquote harvested.
After they have been martyred. Then they're always in the presence of Christ, and they're singing this song of praise to him, I would imagine. But the Jews that you were talking about in chapter 12 are those Jews who lived in Jerusalem and in current day Israel, who heed Jesus's words. When he's given the Olivet Discourse, and Jesus says, hey, when you see these things happen, and when you see the abomination of desolation, that's that moment that Antichrist sets up, or the false prophet sets up the idol in the Jewish temple, the rebuilt Jewish temple. Jesus had told the Jewish people there when he was here on earth, flee to the desert, flee, run as far away as you can, because Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. That's the group that flee. They heed his words. So maybe they're Jews who have come to believe in the Messiah prior to, during the first part of the tribulation, or they just do not want to be part of a nation that does that, and they flee from the Antichrist. And the Antichrist pursues them, God protects them, and in his anger, the Antichrist turns on the Christians. I know it, yeah, and there's a lot going on. There's a whole lot going on.
So even though the 144,000 are Jewish people, they don't flee to the sanctuary.
Now, if this is the same group, if it's the same group, if it's not the same group, then yeah, quite possibly they could. But they were sent to the Gentiles, just like the original 12 apostles were ultimately sent to the Gentiles, right? When the Jews finally said, "We've had enough," right? Read early church history about the lives of the original 12 disciples. We've got them in India. We've got them, maybe some say in England. We've got them in Spain. We've got them all over, right? They went to the Gentile nation. And that first 144,000 Jewish evangelists also, they're missionaries to the Gentiles, to the nations. So could they quite possibly come back to Israel? Sure. But I believe that God has called them to be a missionary, and they're going to be missionary till the end, till God tells them to stop. What else? All right, if you guys are too shy, you can always email me. I don't mind that either. I won't tell anybody.